Okay, great.
Okay, so
Yes, we are live.
looking for YouTube.
All right, hold on.
Yeah, it says we're live. Cool, man. Now Facebook, if you would.
Yep. Give me one moment. Is the subscribers. Okay, Greg, I shared it on your page.
Very good. Give me a minute. Oh, Jesus. Hang on a second.
Sure.
Mark?
Oh, hey,
Dude, I need to call you back. I'm about how to sort of put it off without being offensive.
It's okay, Greg.
It was like weird. Good guy too. He doesn't usually call me unless I got a drumming gig.
Oh, cool.
Okay.
Oh, that is cool. Yeah, I just got a sound job up in North Jersey for a Christmas party.
Hmm.
So, Greg, when you're playing the drums, you're up there like Rolling Stones?
Do I do what?
Or are you up there like the Rolling Stones or Kiss with the drums? Like
I love playing the drums, man. I think it's just one of the most wonderful
Mhm.
ways to exercise and cut loose and have a blast.
Oh yeah, I would think playing the drums, especially if you have a stressful day, I think it's a great way to really, because you're banging on drums and instead of on walls.
That's right. I think we're good.
Okay.
All right. All right. Let me get the clock going. All right, whenever you're ready. Yeah.
And take it, Greg.
Welcome, everyone. It is 6:36 on Monday night. We're getting a late start. I hope you hung in there. You are listening to the 211th installment of the Age Out Angels Radio Hour on HamiltonRadio.net Channel 2. I'm your host, Greg Rapport. I'm the founder of Age Out Angels. We provide one-to-one mentors to vulnerable youth for the purpose of coordinating the care and services that they need to thrive. We try to help young people avoid some of the horrible pitfalls that they're likely to face when they don't have a proper safety net. And this program is brought to you every week at the same time, courtesy of Doc G, William Saunders, Ruben Rodriguez, and all the fine people here at Hamilton Radio who allow us to use this airtime so generously. Ruben's on the big board tonight. Robin's producing, as always. So good to have both of you with me, and so good to have those of you listening from your computers or in your cars in New Jersey and across the country. We have three really main topics tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about school, about how this whole tutoring thing and how it's relating to the catch-up that's necessary, caused mainly, I would think, by the pandemic. I mean, this is bad across the country. Math scores are plummeting. Of course, the big story tonight involves reimagining child welfare. It's not working. We need to look at it differently. And there's a very interesting research piece that offers some insight into how to do that. And how many youth do we need to tell us it's not working before we provide more than like Band-Aid fixes to a program that many people say has an unacceptable structure to begin with. But we'll talk more about that. And then in my final words tonight, I'm gonna actually each week I'm going to give you another example of white privilege that you probably weren't aware of. It just happens. You don't even think about it. Don't feel guilty. Come on, I'm not trying to make anybody feel guilty, but you need to know that these things exist, because that awareness is what leads to greater sensitivity, greater empathy, and hopefully eventually to greater opportunity to everyone. So yeah, speaking of opportunity and equality and all that stuff, there's an interesting issue right now being debated in the country, and it has to do with the textbooks used in schools as relates to representation of LGBTQ images. Saving that for the end. That's going to be my final words tonight, and it is highly provocative. So I want you to stay with me all night. If you want to add to the discussion, positive or negative, it's okay. Either way, you're welcome to call in. Don't be afraid. The number is 609-807-2492. 609-807-2492. And understand that we are aware that some of the things that we talk about in the show can trigger deep feelings. And please, if you're thinking about harming yourself in any way, just pick up your phone, call 988, okay? Pick up your phone, call 988. Talk to someone who's trained to talk to you in this situation. Don't pick up your phone and talk to the person who hurt you. Please take a moment now. If you're looking at us on Facebook or YouTube, I need you to hit all the buttons for me. Like, subscribe, share, all this stuff. Definitely share this if you're looking at us on Facebook, because everyone needs to know what we're talking about tonight. This is like hidden information. It's out there, but it's hidden, and you don't get it any other way. You can write to me during the show in the comments field on Facebook. You can call in if you want to join the conversation. Again, 609-807-2492 is the number. But please share this, okay? Share this with your friends and the people on your social media network. And I want you to stay with Hamilton Radio all night long for the best music. We have an ongoing pledge drive for Hamilton Radio. If you'd be so kind to go to HamiltonRadio.net on the welcome screen, you'll see a chance to make a donation. Take care of these people. They're good to us. Let's be good to them. As always, I want to remind people all over New Jersey about the Bridges to Employment program. The fact is, it simply doesn't get any better than when high school just comes to you. You can't go to high school? No problem. We'll come to you. Think about that. And I will tell you that on the education front in general, things are not looking good coming out of the pandemic. Here's an article by Josh Backen of the Patch staff titled "COVID Set Back New Jersey's Math Reading Scores and the Nation's Report Card. It Gets Worse from There." New Jersey is the dateline. Math and reading scores of students in New Jersey and the rest of the country declined over the past 3 years, especially in mathematics, according to a new Nation's Report Card, the first comprehensive analysis of the pandemic's academic toll on U.S. school children. Nationally, nearly 4 in 10 eighth graders failed to grasp basic math concepts, in the biggest decline in math scores in decades, according to learn this organization, okay? According to the National Assessment of Educational Progress. The NAEP is the report comes from them, released Monday by the National Center for Education Statistics. This is part of the U.S. Department of Education, so this is government research. The pandemic has profoundly impacted children in several ways. And here's the one nobody ever thinks of: caregiver loss. One of the major factors behind advocacy for school mitigation measures. In the fall of 2021, the American Academy of Pediatrics estimated that at least 140,000 children around the U.S. lost a primary or secondary caregiver due to COVID-19. Now, that toll has increased to 268,200 kids who have lost a caregiver, and that's according to estimates from the Imperial College London. But the pandemic has also been linked to learning loss. Reading scores among fourth graders also slid to the lowest level since 1990. The declines in fourth and eighth grader scores in mathematics were the largest ever recorded. This achievement test is given every 2 years to the nation's fourth and eighth graders. This also showed that reading scores are sliding. Now, this test is mandated by Congress to measure students' progress and learning experiences in various subjects. It hasn't been given since 2019 because of the pandemic. Peggy Carr, commissioner of the National Center for Education Statistics, it's a branch of the Education Department, told the Associated Press, "When we experience a 1 or 2 point decline, we're talking about it as a significant impact on a student's achievement. In math, we experienced an 8-point decline, historic for this assessment," she said. Education researchers generally equate a 10-point decline with a year of learning. Specific to New Jersey, New Jersey's eighth grade math scores fell 11 points on a 500-point scale. Eighth graders' reading scores remained the same in 2019 and 2022. Math got hammered. At the fourth grade level, New Jersey's math scores slid 7 points from 246 to 239. Fourth grade reading scores also dipped just slightly, 4 points. But remember, they used to consider a 1 to 2 point dip a significant impact. New Jersey's aforementioned figures still exceed the national averages, but make a decline in testing scores observed around the U.S. Nationally, the average mathematics score for fourth graders has fallen 5 points since 2019, while the score for eighth graders dropped 8 points. In reading, average scores for both grades fell 3 points. The math score declines are the largest ever recorded for the subject. None of the 50 states and the District of Columbia saw an increase in eighth grade math scores, although Utah and the U.S. Department of Education activity schools saw no change. Overall, 38% of eighth grader scores were graded as below basic. Now, that's a cutoff. That's eighth grader scores, 38%, close enough to have below basic. That measures whether students can find the third angle in a triangle if they're given the other two. In 2019, 31% of eighth graders scored below that level. So that number bumped by 7% during this time period. Eighth grade There's a quote here: eighth grade is a pivotal moment in students' mathematics education as they develop key mathematics skills for further learning and potential careers in mathematics and science. This, according to Daniel J. McGrath, acting NCES Associate Commissioner for Assessment. If left unaddressed, this could alter the trajectories and life opportunities of a whole cohort of young people, potentially reducing their abilities to pursue rewarding and productive careers in mathematics, science, and technology. Now, every region of the country saw test scores slide. Every state saw a decline in at least one subject. Several major districts saw test scores fall by more than 10 points. Now, ready? Here comes the payoff. Are you sitting in your chairs? What you're about to hear should not be a surprise if you've ever heard this show before. Ready? Confirming what many had feared. Racial inequalities appear to have widened during the pandemic. In fourth grade, Black and Hispanic students saw bigger decreases than white students, widening gaps that have persisted for decades. Just another way to screw low-income people. Inequities were also reflected in a growing gap between higher and lower performing students. In math and reading, scores fell most sharply among the lower performing students, creating a widening chasm between struggling students and the rest of their peers. When schools shifted to remote learning, higher performing students were far more likely to have reliable access to quiet spaces, computers, help from their teachers. This is what the survey found. This achievement gap, not a surprise at all. And also, it needs to be noted that the Associated Press contributed to that report. So now the question becomes, what do we do to fix this? And you might be surprised by how much money the federal government threw at this in order to fix it. And I'm going to tell you all about that as soon as I tell you all about Paul Sansone Jr. and his auto mall on Route 66 in Neptune, New Jersey, and the new Sansone Jr.'s Windsor Nissan 590 US 130 in East Windsor. We love Paul. He gave a car to one of our kids. Come on, go buy a car from him if you're anywhere near Neptune or East Windsor, New Jersey, and you're looking for a new automobile. Visit Paul Sansone Jr. and let him know you heard about it right here on the Age Out Angels Radio Hour. People, whenever you can, support the businesses who support you and your communities. Visit Sansone Jr. on Route 66 in Neptune, Sansone Jr.'s Windsor Nissan 590 US 130 in East Windsor, New Jersey. If you just joined, we're talking about how the education system is failing on both the academic side and on the catch up from COVID side. I'm going to have bumper stickers made, catch up from COVID. So here's where the money is. Schools are required to spend 20% of their $122 billion in federal pandemic recovery funds on helping students catch up academically. $40 billion, $44 billion, is that what we're talking about? 20% of $122 billion, 1/5. Education researchers in the U.S. Department of Education are calling for schools to set up tutoring programs, especially for the weakest students who fell the most behind during the pandemic. Strong evidence suggests academic gains have come from a specific type of intensive tutoring that takes place 3 or more times a week and is often referred to as high dosage tutoring. Hallmarks of the proven programs are not just frequency, but working in person with tutors using clear lesson plans rather than merely helping students get their homework done. And the sessions are scheduled during school hours when attendance is required. Do you have that picture in your mind? It's important that you have that picture of what high dosage really means, okay? Working in person with tutors. The tutors have their own set of clear lesson plans, not just helping the kids get through their homework, right? And it's happening during school hours. Attendance is most likely, to be there. So that's what they call high dosage tutoring, okay? Now, some people believe that good tutoring also means working with the same tutor over time, building a relationship, which isn't usually possible when you're talking about an on-demand sort of support. So what was happening is there are companies who sell on-demand 24/7 tutoring, and school districts who bought that as supplemental to their students returning to class after the pandemic, and it all makes sense on paper, okay? But that sort of working with the same tutor and developing that relationship is not possible with an on-demand kind of support. This, according to Amanda Natzel, assistant professor at the Center for Research and Reform in Education at Johns Hopkins University and research director for Proven Tutoring, which is a coalition of organizations that provide evidence-based tutoring programs. Natzel advises schools not to spend their pandemic recovery money on 24/7 online tutoring. She says, I think in most cases, no. There is very little evidence to support this and plenty of better alternatives. Several online tutoring companies have been marketing their 24/7 tutoring services to schools as high dosage, but it really isn't by the definition I said earlier. Paper is the name of an organization, right? They have a web page devoted to high dosage tutoring, correctly explaining the model that researchers are advocating, while presenting online products as newer, more scalable high-dosage tutoring models. It's really deceptive. Business has exploded since the pandemic hit. Paper currently has tutoring contracts with 300 school districts around the country, including Las Vegas, Boston, Atlanta, and statewide deals with Mississippi and Tennessee. Paper says that nominating teachers who can champion their product in the district and share best practices have been effective in driving more use. However, Paper declined to disclose what its current usage rates are, and I'll bet dollars to donuts that they are very low. And yeah, that's a great idea, though. If you can get the teachers engaged to the point where they can at least sort of push the kids at the back end to use the service, then you might increase, your usage rate by a certain amount. You certainly wouldn't solve the problem that way, though. Research-backed tutoring programs, by contrast, are difficult for schools to manage. So the school managing the program itself doesn't really work that well. They have to hire, they have to train tutors, find classroom space for the tutoring sessions, rescheduling the school day to make time for it. It's much easier for school leaders to pay for an online tutoring service that takes place outside the school walls. At first glance, on-demand online tutoring would seem to be more economical. Cutler said his company charges a flat fee of $40 to $80 per student, depending on the size of the school district, regardless of hours or how many students log in. Online tutoring is still relatively new, and these on-demand services may yet prove to be effective. Meanwhile, the Aspire schools in California have reconsidered on-demand tutoring, and many aren't using it anymore. The schools that are have shifted to using the online tutors for special projects and as an additional resource when parents aren't available for on-the-spot help with homework. We just, in the Bridges to Employment program, we just try to eliminate the obstacles that stand in the way. I had the most wonderful experience today. May I tell you about it? I'll be brief, but a person came into our program who was hesitant for a year and a half, maybe 2 years. She had been calling me. We spoke from time to time. Never quite ready. Came in, took a diagnostic test, and tested so high in the reading portion of the program that she doesn't even have to go to school. You can go right in, march right in and take the reading and probably the science and social studies parts of the high school equivalency test without any schoolwork at all. It's like the information, the knowledge is living inside of her, and she just needs to sort of come out and get credit for it. It's the most wonderful thing in the world when you're running a program like Bridges to Employment and you see that happen. You have that experience with a young person and the look on her face, when I said, we're not sending you to school, we're sending you to take the test, is just absolutely amazing. We'll get to our top story in just a moment. Before we go further, I do need to thank you for listening to that. I really need to share that with somebody, and I'm glad there's 40,000 of you out there to do that with. Before we go further, I need to thank all the people who made donations to Age Out Angels this week. Thank you so very much. We love you, love you, love you. Church and Dwight really came through for us. If everyone that you can donate to Age Out Angels every time you make a purchase from Amazon. All you have to do is designate Age Out Angels to be your Amazon Smile designee, and a portion of your payment will go to Age Out Angels without it costing you 1 penny more. I can make it really easy for you. I send you a direct link to our Amazon Smile designation. Just, hit me up on Facebook or email me directly at greg@ageoutangels.org. And I'd be happy to send you that link and make that process easy. It doesn't cost you any money. And boy, it's wonderful. Every month we get a check from Amazon, and God bless all of you. Thank you so much. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be here. So here's our main story. This is like really intense. The title of it is "If I Wasn't Poor, I Wouldn't Be Unfit." A family separation crisis in the U.S. child welfare system. This comes to us by way of an organization called Human Rights Watch. And it was written by Bobby Butts, an advocate in California. And it goes like this. It's been more than 2 years since Adeline Stevens' 6 children were removed from her care and placed in the foster system. Her nightmare began on a night like any other. Her 9-year-old son, Elijah, was dancing in the kitchen and slipped on some water, injuring his hip. I rushed him to the emergency room when he got hurt, Adeline said. The doctors asked me questions. I told them everything. I trusted them to help him. Adeline was shocked when she learned that her son's medical providers reported her to Child Protective Services for suspected abuse, triggering a cascade of state interventions that irreparably harmed her children and their family bond. So what happened? Well, the Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services, that's DCFS, launched an investigation. A caseworker visited the children's school and pulled them from class to question them. Came to the home unannounced and randomly strip searched the children ages 1, 4, 7, and 9, and 10 to check their bodies for signs of abuse. Adeline said these visits were so frightening for her children that her youngest child began screaming every time she saw anyone with a badge. Adeline was required to take a drug test, a requirement often and disproportionately imposed on Black mothers. She has scoliosis and spina bifida. Her doctor prescribed Percocet for the pain, but it was damaging her liver and stomach lining. I made the decision to change to medical marijuana, which was way better for my health, she said. You feel what's coming next? She tested positive for THC, there's the active substance in marijuana, the chemical responsible for its psychological effects. They stated that my marijuana usage rendered me incapable of providing 24-hour care to my children, she said. Adeline knew it was at stake. She was removed from her own parents' care as a child and grew up in the foster system. Afraid that her children would be taken from her, Adeline agreed to 6 months of follow-up with a caseworker, weekly drug testing, and parenting classes in exchange for keeping her children home with her. Did you hear all that shit? Afraid that her children would be taken from her, she agrees to this whole routine. We're going to make you a better parent. We're going to make you a better family, and you have to do all this. And you got to start to wonder if this is just justifying your own existence, right? In the meantime, Adeline gave birth to her youngest child. The birth was complicated because of her spinal conditions. She had to use a wheelchair and a walker for 2 months. During that time, she rescheduled one of Elijah's follow-up appointments. Adeline said DCFS told her they found bed bugs in a couch and holes in the walls of her home. Did you know that a percentage of furniture actually comes from the furniture manufacturing warehouse with bed bugs? Just thought I'd point that out. Days before her case was set to be reviewed, Adeline was informed that a judge had ordered the children be removed from her custody due to the condition of the home and because she rescheduled her son's appointment. Her children, including her infant son, were removed from her care, separated from each other, and placed in foster homes. 4 of the 6 children have experienced abuse in the foster system and are coping with serious mental health impacts, Adeline said. One of her sons had to be admitted to a mental health facility for inpatient care. The children remain in the foster system at the time of writing, and Adeline is fighting to get them back. The situation has caused me so much pain and anger and trauma from the separation from my children, she said. I just want to get my purpose back. I knew I wanted to be a mother, and that's all I ever knew how to do. Please help me and my kids. This is a national problem. 1 in 3 children in the United States will be part of a child welfare investigation by age 18. Every 3 minutes, a child is removed from their home and placed in the foster system. Black children are almost twice as likely to experience investigations as white children and are more likely to be separated from their families. As a result, more than 200,000 children enter the foster system each year. And the truth is they can't handle the load. There aren't enough houses. There aren't enough families. While the U.S. child welfare system's stated purpose is to improve child safety, permanency, and well-being, and child welfare workers believe they are defending children's rights to health and life, system interventions too often unnecessarily disrupt family integrity and cause harm to the very children they aim to protect. As nearly all people involved in child welfare acknowledge, removing a child from their parents' care, even for a short period of time, is a drastic measure that can cause profound harm. Those impacted are disproportionately communities of color, especially Black and Indigenous families and people living in poverty. The report examines removals of children, the termination of parental rights by state child welfare systems, focusing primarily on 4 states: California, New York, Oklahoma, and West Virginia. The number of children removed from their families, the too often unjust circumstances of removal, and the disproportionate effects on Black and Indigenous families and those living in poverty make this a national family separation crisis, warranting immediate attention and action. This report finds that child welfare systems too often respond to circumstances of poverty with punishment. Parents too often face charges of neglect and see their children removed from their care instead of receiving support to keep families together. Black and Indigenous families disproportionately face neglect charges and removals. In fact, federal and state data show racial and ethnic disparities exist at every stage of involvement, with particular harm to Black families. As a result, many parents, advocates, and experts describe the system not as one primarily of child protection, but as family regulation and policing. All right, so what's this family regulation? What is regulating families? Well, child welfare involvement begins with a report to the State Child Protective Services hotline. If you suspect child abuse and neglect, you report them. Millions of reports are made every year. In 2019, for example, 3 million reports were made regarding nearly 8 million children. Reports can be made anonymously with the intention. The anonymous nature of those reports has the intention of encouraging reporting and identification of children at risk. However, we've learned since that anonymous reporting can be ineffective because public reporters may provide insufficient information to avoid disclosing their identity. Anonymous reporting also carries with it significant risks of misuse, in particular by perpetrators of domestic violence and others who see reporting as a means of retaliation for grievances. They use reporting as leverages. If I'll report you, and then they'll take your kid away. That's actually been said to people that I've worked with who were victims of domestic violence. So you either stay in the house and get knocked around, or the worst consequence is you lose your child. Families with limited resources often have more exposure to mandated reporters because they have greater need for and use of social services. This creates a dynamic where families living in poverty are surveilled, scrutinized, and reported more than those with greater resources. Black and Indigenous families are more likely to be reported for child abuse and neglect than white families, resulting in a racial and ethnic disproportionality of families surveilled and scrutinized. State officials review reports and refer about half for investigation or other child welfare agency response. Now, every year, child welfare agencies investigate millions of parents. In 2019, they investigated the parents of nearly 3.5 million children. Data analysis conducted for this report shows a correlation between poverty and the rate of maltreatment investigations. Counties with higher numbers of families below the poverty line have a higher rate of maltreatment investigations, and counties with higher family incomes have lower rates of investigations. Investigations are often highly stressful and even traumatizing for children and their families, involving unannounced home and school visits and body checks. Parents describe the investigation and monitoring period as nerve-wracking, invasive, and humiliating. Angela Olivia Burton, former director of New York State Office of Indigent Legal Services, told Human Rights Watch that an investigation has the impact of rupturing the village of the child's ecological system, which has ripple effects and brings not just stigma, but also fear and distrust as it tears the fabric of a child's life and community. Notoriously broad and malleable state definitions of abuse and neglect allow for significant subjectivity. As a result, determinations are susceptible to conscious and unconscious bias based on race, class, or other factors. If the caseworker or child welfare agency subjectively determines that abuse or neglect has occurred, the allegation is deemed substantiated. In other words, that word is law, and the parents or other caregivers are listed on a state central registry for years, adversely affecting their access to employment and ability to foster other children, including their own relatives. In some states, parents are listed on the registry even without a substantiated allegation. See, if you're not in this, if you're not in the middle of either a case or in the middle of this industry, you don't notice shit's going on, and it's nasty. It is so nasty. Many child welfare interventions happen without judicial oversight. In addition, many parents do not have legal support in the early stages of child welfare intervention. This in turn can limit parents' ability to respond to charges and their opportunity to appeal. And I don't know, maybe later it talks about this, but let's also bear in mind that if a parent has a job and they get mandated to do two things, court appearances and go to places where they'll need transportation to get to their parental training and money management class and food cooking class and things like that, it just doesn't make sense. On average, across the United States, 700 children are removed from the custody of their parents every day based on allegations of abuse or neglect. Removing a child from their parents' care can have devastating consequences, even if the separation is a short period of time. Parents say they feel broken, destroyed, and completely shattered in a perpetual state of grief, trauma, and longing at seeing their children placed in the foster system. We were sad when we became empty nesters and our children went away. I mean, come on, can you imagine you have a 3-year-old, a 6-year-old, and the state just comes in and says, nah. Whether to maintain their child at home or to reunify, most parents agree to complete service plan. They just say okay, required by the child welfare agency at times without judicial oversight. Parents seeking to reunite with their children may be allowed to visit their child, but even that might have to happen under some form of supervision. Now, caseworkers are responsible for referring parents to services and supporting them towards reunification and providing them with timely updates on their children's well-being in the foster system. In parallel, caseworkers monitor children in foster homes, connect them to health services, and, in compliance with federal requirements when circumstances warrant, make plans for their adoption. Chris Gottlieb, a law professor and child welfare expert at New York University, said these combined responsibilities creates a conflict of interest. Social workers play a dual role with opposing goals. They're expected to support the same parents they're charged with investigating and prosecuting. They're expected to support the same parents they are charged with investigating and prosecuting. That creates a conflict that is not resolvable. If we want social workers to actually be helpful to families, the roles must be separated. Now, judges review case reports and agency recommendations on whether the family should be reunified or the parents' rights terminated. Sometimes they'll review like a CASA recommendation as well, if there's a CASA worker involved in that. If a parent completes the service plan in a timely manner and a satisfactory manner, the agency may recommend reunification. If the court agrees, the child returns to the family, initially on a trial basis. It feels like they always have their foot on your neck, initially on a trial basis and then permanently. Alternatively, the agency may recommend termination of parental rights, which a court may order if it finds termination to be in the child's best interests and if other legal requirements are met. In 2019, the parents of about 62,000 children had their parental rights terminated with devastating consequences for families. Now, one of the things we do is punish poverty. The most common reason why child welfare agencies become involved with families is neglect, followed by parental substance use, by the way. Most child removals by the U.S. child welfare system do not involve physical abuse. Only 13% of all child removals in 2019 occurred due to physical abuse. 13%. 87%, what we're talking about, this neglect falls, is 87% of 200,000 kids. While definitions can vary from one state to the next, neglect is generally defined as a parent or caregiver failing to provide adequate food, clothing, hygiene, nutrition, shelter, medical care, or supervision in ways that threaten the well-being of the child. This definition is inexorably linked to poverty. Many people we interviewed described how circumstances related to poverty, including housing instability and inadequate resources, were used as evidence of parental unfitness, either to support neglect allegations or justify family separation or termination of parental rights. Here's the example. Amelia Smith, 52-year-old woman from Oklahoma, was the primary caregiver for her 8-year-old son, her aunt with Down syndrome, and her 40-year-old husband who had lupus. The demands of caring for her husband, aunt, and son left her unable to maintain paid employment. And if you've ever done caregiving, that makes perfect sense. So she relied on public benefits for support. The family lived together in a modest mobile home without running water, but bought and stored water in large containers. They knew how to live that way. Child Protective Services came to their home for reasons Amelia still doesn't understand, but the condition of the home was a factor in the investigation. They said one reason was because we had no running water. But she says, I had like 12 gallons in my camper. Water wasn't the problem, Amelia told Human Rights Watch. She explained that they were looking for a bigger home to accommodate the family more comfortably, but they had not yet found a place she could afford. So instead of providing support and referrals for improving the condition of their home and addressing disruptions in their access to water, CPS removed James, their 8-year-old son, from care. A loss Amelia said she grapples with daily. I have no idea where he is, she says. I look for him every time I go out. Amelia's husband passed away without seeing their son James again. Joshua Mitchum, a Connecticut public defender who represents parents in child welfare proceedings, discussed the ways class differences between investigators and parents play a role in child welfare determinations. If a social worker doesn't know what it's like to be poor and doesn't know what it's like to make the compromises poor people have to make, they may describe a messy or cluttered house as deplorable or filthy, increasing the likelihood that the child will be removed. Parents living in poverty described how their lack of access to reliable information, services, or support was interpreted as parental unfitness. For some parents, this lack of resources was used as evidence to remove their children. For others, it prevented them from reuniting. Housing instability or other difficulties in meeting the child welfare system's housing-related requirements, or the inability to take off work or pay for travel or other costs associated with getting to required classes or drug testing, makes it difficult for parents living in poverty to meet that set of requirements in their service plans. As a result, conditions of poverty can prevent family reunification. So you have to take poverty very seriously in this, and boy, once you do, it can really change the numbers, can it? But let's talk for a minute about punishing substance abuse. The report also documents how parental substance use is too often punished by this child welfare system without consideration of the ability to parent or without clear evidence of harm or risk of imminent harm to the child. The Movement for Family Power, a nonprofit organization working to end the foster system's policing and punishment of families, has reported on the child welfare system's indiscriminate conflation of substance use with abuse or neglect, with families sundered as a consequence. Many system-involved parents like Adeline, whose story opened this report, are required to undergo drug testing. Any parental substance use can be deemed without further evidence to interfere with the ability to parent and can be the basis of an abuse or neglect finding. In some cases, parents in recovery from substance use disorders said their adherence to medically indicated treatment plans was used against them. Over the last 2 decades, the number of children removed from their families and placed in the foster system due to parental alcohol or drug use has more than doubled. Nearly 80,000 children, more than 1/3 of all removals, were placed in foster homes due to parental drug use in 2019. 80,000 children. And an estimated 80% of all foster system cases involve parental drug use allegations at some point in the case. 80%. These numbers are staggering, okay? Now, there's also due process concerns. Despite the often profound consequences of child welfare involvement, including family separation, termination of parental rights, and in some cases criminal charges, parents have fewer due process protections in child welfare cases than individuals facing similarly serious consequences in a criminal legal system. One parent said, is a quote, "As many issues as there are in the criminal justice system, I wish all of this happened in criminal court. At least we could get a jury trial." The report highlights a range of due process concerns, including lack of information on rights and problems with legal representation and support. And that is very, very important, the way parents are treated in the beginning, of one of these, types of cases. So what we need to start thinking about seriously is how to reimagine the child welfare system. The harms are so severe, long-term reduction in the system's footprint and a reimagining of non-coercive, rights-respecting child protection approach are needed. A woman earlier in this story, I think she had 4 children and another one was on the way. It's legitimate for people to ask the question, why did she have another child? She had, like health issues herself. Most of us, who have paid a lot of taxes in our lives will ask that question. What the hell was she thinking when she had like child number 5? And she says, I always wanted to be a mother. I was always destined to be a mother. That was always the one thing I could do. But how many children does she not be able to feed? How many children does she need to constantly have a bigger house to accommodate? There's gotta be, and I know you can't restrict a person's ability to reproduce. I get that, but there has to be something somewhere that it says, like, stop, leave a few dollars for another family to do that, because the money tree isn't unlimited. Now, maybe it is, and that's another thing we're thinking about, because believe me, if we can give $75 billion to Ukraine, and which I was totally in favor of, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but if we could just, suddenly go, oh, hey, those people need our help, and send them $75 billion, why can't we just say, oh, hey, these children need our help? And well, apparently we sent $40 billion to their schools, and that's not working. So maybe the reason we don't do that is because we don't seem to know how to handle that kind of money. But nonetheless, there's realities in this that also deserve to be put on the table, because if you don't, they become the elephant in the room. And I would like to hear from somebody out there, if not now, certainly during the week, who can talk to me about that aspect of this topic. And we'll continue it next week and talk about more ways to reimagine the child welfare system in a way that may, sort of actually work. Okay? So we'll talk more about that, and I hope I hear from people during the week. Now, want to get on to my final words because there's actually two parts to them tonight. I like to tell everybody a little piece of white privilege every week. And there's this article written by Ella Alexander in Harper's Bazaar in 2021. I think it's like the 20 most typical examples of white privilege. And they're just, if you're white, you just don't think about this. If I can, this is number one. If I can, I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. Speaks to comfort zone. As white people, there's just more of us. We don't feel it. We don't feel that the same way. It's very rare that we're the only white person in a group or one of three white people. And, you know, I do know what that feels like, and it ain't no big deal to me. But I can certainly imagine that if that's a rarity, that it would be. Number two in her list is, if I should need to move, I can be pretty sure of renting or purchasing housing in an area which I can afford and in which I would want to live. Not something we think about as white people. Anyway, that's two. I'll give you more each week, okay? And maybe if we're lucky, she'll come on the show at some point. Speaking of privilege, raging debate in this country over the difference between representation and indoctrination. Some people with strong opinions don't really seem to know the difference. And that's critically important when you consider there's children involved on several levels. Young children now, we're talking about children. Well, here's the thing. Everybody says children would appreciate seeing someone who looks like them or lives like them in books and illustrations and in their teachers and in their healthcare practitioners. It's comforting, I guess, right? To some degree. Maybe they let their guard down and accept learning easier or something like that. But that's representation. See, that's not indoctrination. And a lot of people have it in their heads that everybody who's gay is like either a pedophile or worse. The word that you hear a lot now is groomer. They're being groomed. Our children are being groomed. I'm going to take a little side trip here for a second because I want you to understand some context, because guess what? Gay has always been a part of American culture. You know, I have no doubt that it's actually been around since the beginning of time. But in America, okay, we have a semi-quantifiable example. Thanks to a colonist by the name of Thomas Morton. Thomas Morton. Now, this comes from two different sources, and the way history remembers stuff is just remarkable here, okay? Because this first source, the headline was First Gay Colony. It was like 96-point type, right? First Gay Colony. Thomas Morton, in his late 1940s, with a background in law, set sail for New England in 1624. Morton was extremely responsive to the natural world and had very friendly relations with the Indians. Puritan expert William Heath told Atlas Obscura in 2019 that the Puritans took the opposite stance, that the natural world was a howling wilderness and the Indians were wild men that needed to be suppressed. It's not surprising then that Morton soon fell out with the Puritans of the New England Plymouth colony. So he's pretty much ostracized, right? You know, it sounds like, to be honest with you, it sounds like the Puritans, you know, had all the rules and regulations and everything else, and it sounds like the reason they had all those is they were scared shitless, you know? Morton founded and took on the role of host of what became known as the Merrymount colony. But the governor of the Plymouth colony, William Bradley, had a different name for him. He called him Lord of the Misrule. After all, Morton encouraged dancing and frisking together with the Native Americans in Massachusetts. By the way, Merrymount is where Quincy is today. Quincy, Massachusetts is the site of what I'm talking about. And Morton's ultimate pagan-like pastime involved, are you ready for this? A maypole. It had him going nuts. And this is why things represented in history, it's so important how things are represented in history. So another source takes that same story and in a very staid way says, some historians have also suggested that homosexuality may have been tolerated at Marymount. For example, the authors of the Boston History Project's book, Improper Bostonians, points out that Morton mentions Jupiter, the king of the gods, and Ganymede, his male mortal lover, when writing about Marymount. Of course, Ganymede was also Jupiter's cupbearer, so he may have been mentioned because of his connection with getting drunk. Still, male homosexuality was somewhat tolerated among educated Englishmen like Morton. For example, the character of Antonio in Shakespeare's Twelfth Night is clearly in love with Sebastian, something the other characters do not question. This is a story of this Marymount colony that is conveniently not represented in the history books and will never be represented in the history books in Texas. And this leads me to an opinion piece written by a gentleman named Morgan Polikoff, an associate professor of education at the Rosier School of Education at the University of Southern California. This was published by the Hechinger Report. Now, he wrote this is an opinion piece, okay? So he wrote it in first person. So I'm going to change the person so that you understand that it is he whose voice this is in and not mine personally, because this is pretty personal. And this is what he wrote. He wrote, most Americans don't believe young kids should read or learn LGBTQ themes. And they don't. So there's an overwhelming percentage who doesn't believe this. That's why we must focus on helping queer kids feel supported and affirmed and look toward non-school solutions. Most Americans don't believe young kids should have access to or be assigned readings or topics with LGBTQ themes, even though we often talk about the benefits of students seeing themselves in the curriculum. He writes, when I was a boy in the mid-1990s, thinking he was probably gay, there wasn't much to look forward to. This was before the "it gets better" concept, back when the number one word associated with being gay was still AIDS, okay? It goes without saying that there was nothing in his public school curriculum that made him feel good about being gay. No gay characters in books, nothing about LGBTQ historical figures, nothing about gay issues in health class. Today, we often talk about the benefits of students seeing themselves in the curriculum, and there's ample evidence that cultural relevance matters tremendously to many different groups. The absence of that representation was a denial of opportunity for him and the millions of other LGBTQ students like him. But for as much as we know now about the importance of kids seeing their identities reflected in the curriculum, new research shows that most Americans don't believe young kids should have access to or be assigned readings or topics with LGBTQ themes. These beliefs may be misguided, even sometimes based on bigotry, but they are a reality that we need to grapple with as we work to make American schools less harmful places for queer and questioning children. See, what they don't realize is the damage. It's not like out of sight, out of mind. It's out of sight causes damage. See, it's all too easy to write our opponents off as rank bigots, but that won't help the queer kids in schools today. And there are real people going through this now. After decades of progress, we're entering a darker moment when it comes to LGBTQ freedoms in the US. And whether state governments help us or get in our way, we have to focus on those kids, doing what we can to make sure they feel supported, affirmed, and loved for whoever they are. In a recent national survey, this gentleman co-directed that survey, found that fewer than half of Americans support elementary school children even having access in schools to books about most LGBT issues, let alone being assigned to read them. Support was tepid among Democrats, it's about 50%, and dismal among Republicans. Surprise, fewer than 10%. This was among the largest partisan divides on issues we asked about. Dismal among Republicans, fewer than 10%. And I believe I believe wholeheartedly, I'm editorializing here, this is not his voice, this is mine. I believe that those 90% of the Republicans are the single largest group of closeted homosexuals in the country today. Oh, goodness. Anyway, back to this article. At the high school level, Americans mostly supported students having access to these books, but they still opposed to them being assigned. And when we asked more generally about whether children should learn about specific controversial topics in school, LGBT issues came in last place of 24 listed topics. The reality is that a substantial majority of Americans, I'm sorry, I just got a message came in on the chat that sort of surprised me. And there's someone is asking me to differentiate LGBTQ mentions versus sexuality, and I will get to that, I promise. Okay, and I got your message as well. Anyway, the reality is that a substantial majority of Americans have unfavorable views towards LGBTQ issues in the curriculum, especially for young children. It's not necessarily because they believe grotesque lies about LGBTQ folks being groomers. It's because many of them just feel young kids aren't ready to learn about these issues. We also found that most Americans opposed the inclusion of many other topics in the elementary curriculum, even those as bland as economic concepts. And some Americans, undoubtedly egged on by lies about the actual prevalence of these topics in schools, well, what can you say? It just isn't. In just a couple of decades, the progress on LGBTQ rights has been breathtaking. The most visible symbol has been marriage equality, right? But cultural representation in books, TV, and movies has also been profoundly important. In some states, like where he lives in California, the school curriculum is required to discuss LGBTQ historical figures and provide LGBTQ inclusive sex education. More queer kids than ever undoubtedly now believe that their identities matter and are valued. But the backlash to all this progress has been swift and powerful. And what he doesn't say in this article is fully funded. These people have more money than God who are going against this. Progressives were caught off guard as the culture wars turned back to LGBTQ issues. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis led Republicans to actually enact legislation dubbed by progressives as the Don't Say Gay bill. And how far was that from, what was it, 1992's Don't Ask, Don't Tell, Bill Clinton's? Legislation, like how do you even do that? The law has been interpreted and experienced as a stifling curriculum on LGBTQ issues altogether, and LGBTQ teachers in the state have felt the need to hide their identities or even leave the classroom because of the law's reach. Let's be clear, the law is disgusting and bigoted, and the LGBTQ kids will be harmed by it. But sadly, the research shows that it's not out of step with how Americans feel about these issues. So what do folks care about LGBTQ kids? And what do folks who do care, do about this sad trend? Well, until recently, we might have counted on the courts to save us. But now the right-leaning judiciary is likely to make things worse, rolling back rights and enabling anti-gay discrimination. The solution for now is three-pronged. One, continue efforts in blue states to enable LGBTQ-friendly curriculum. States can allow California and follow California and put out standards for age-appropriate inclusion. Second, we should continue to work to address parent and voter concerns about issues in schools. Some of these conversations will be difficult, and some proportion of Americans just simply won't be swayed. But just as we move public opinion on marriage equality, maybe we can move them on the idea that all children deserve to see themselves and their identities. And third, we need to lean into non-school solutions for supporting LGBTQ kids. And let's not leave it up to the schools to do everything. Supporting LGBTQ organizations and nonprofits is important too. Listen, I have to leave you with this thought about that subject. And this thought is that the people who are against any representation of alternate, what's now considered an alternate lifestyle, completely misunderstand and conflate the difference between representation and indoctrination. And so we had Dick and Jane books when I was growing up, and there was Mom and Dad, and there was Dick and Jane. And I think they had a neighbor, right? And that's who there was. And I remember this because in first grade, I'll tell you for a fact that they never said to us, and then Dick and Jane were sent to the store because Mom and Dad had to get them out of the house so they could fuck. That was never in any of the books. It was just the Mom and Dad who were there. So we saw Dick and Jane's Mom and Dad, and then we went home and most of us had Mom and Dads. Okay? And that made sense to us. None of those books, I don't think, ever had, a single parent. This is Sarah. She lives with her mom. Her dad, I don't know, can you say her dad passed away? Like, what grade do you teach a kid that a person can die? Right? Those are all things that have to be appropriate. But it's not sexualized. So here's little Joey, and he's sitting in the classroom, and he has two dads. How come the neighbor, how come Dick and Jane's mom and dad can't have a neighbor who has two dads? It's on every sitcom. It's on, it's on every dramedy that's on television right now. It's everywhere you see it, and nobody's being indoctrinated by it. It's not what it is. It's not a grooming. It's something that exists. It enables Joey to sit in the classroom and not have the other kids look at him, and for his whole tenure in school say, "Wow, you have two dads? You're fucked up." Why should a child have to put up with that? And yet they do. And I remember back in olden days when I was growing up, the kids whose parents were divorced when I was younger were frowned upon, really frowned upon, looked at as a substandard. So being different, even in a heterosexual way, and then being not included is nothing new. Okay, it was the family was mom and dad, period. And I hope that people understand that there's not a damn thing wrong with allowing, little Joey with two dads to be represented. There isn't anything wrong with people being able to see who they are and not being made to feel less than. And if we're doing that to children, like if this research is correct and we are really and truly doing that to children, then my Thanksgiving message is we really need to suck less. We really need to take a moment in Thanksgiving and look around and say, God damn, there are people out there with real feelings, and we should give them a reason to be thankful too. Have a wonderful 2 weeks. We won't be here next week. There's things happening at the studio. Can't have the time, but we'll see you in 2 weeks, okay? God bless everyone. Have a happy Thanksgiving. Let's make this next 2 weeks the best 2 weeks ever. Thank you, Ruben. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Hamilton Radio. Have a great 2 weeks, everybody. Bye-bye. And thank you, Mozart. Good night, Ruben. Thanks.
Good night, Greg.